The Law Show on CL 650. A comprehensive look at everything you need to know about the law.
Help! I need somebody. Help! Not just anybody. Help! You know I need someone. Help!
Yeah, and welcome to The Law Show. I'm Zach Spencer, and thanks for being with us here on CL 650. Today we're going to be talking about immigration and citizenship, and we have with us two formidable guests who know all about it. They have a law firm called MKS in Yaletown. Gordon Maynard and Rudy Kisher are here, and your partner is away today. You had him last time. Rudy, it's my first time hosting with you here, so thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks for having us, Zach.
All right, now we want to talk about a bit of a fun subject, first of all, because as Canadians, I always say when I run into Americans, I say, you know, we have the best seat in the house. We get to see U.S. politics play out in real time on our televisions. You know, people in other parts of the world, they see these 30-second clips, but we get to watch the debates, and Donald Trump and the size of his hands, all this kind of nonsense. But it's kind of interesting as Canadians. But as Canadians, we're like a back door for some Americans. You're thinking, if we don't like the political landscape, maybe we'll move somewhere else. And that's where you get immigration lawyers come into play. So, Rudy, tell us about how we've seen a spike in Canada of interest of Americans who maybe, if they don't like the way the election plays out south of the border, might want to come to Canada.
Well, my understanding is they just released these stats in terms of the amount of hits going to the CIC website. And
it was 300% higher, right?
Yeah, so it went from something like 3,000 to 9,000 hits over just after the debates were finished. And I mean, that's a significant increase. In our office, we also saw an increase in terms of, you know, not in massive numbers, but in terms of actually getting some interest from Americans that said, you know, I'm a U.S. citizen, I'm interested in coming to Canada, and they don't have really any other connection coming to Canada. So we've seen that uptake, and my understanding is Nova Scotia has also seen a massive intake in terms of they have a separate immigration program over there in their provincial program, and they've seen a massive intake.
Well, there was a radio DJ who put together a video about Cape Breton and moving to Cape Breton, and that's been, I guess, when people search and that video comes up and people are seeing that, so maybe that's why Nova Scotia also. You know, there was the same thing true, not just with the what is the CIC website anyway? What's that? What's the official name for that?
So that's Citizenship and Immigration, which has now been changed to
IRCC.
IRCC.
So, but also Google searches. They showed on Google massive search for how can I move to Canada?
Yeah, which is shocking. I mean, we haven't seen this sort of interest happen for many years. The last time I remember this happened was in the Bush's second term when he got elected in 2004. Right after the election, we saw this massive increase in terms of Americans wanting to come to Canada.
I have two neighbors who are research physicians, and they live literally around the corner from me, and I've gotten to know them because they have a dog and we have a dog, and of course dog owners stop and talk while their dogs do their business, and they, after that second George W. Bush election, they did move to Canada and are now in the process of being Canadian. I think this summer they'll be Canadian citizens. So people really do follow through. Probably a very small percentage, though.
Well, to give you an idea, so when that happened in 2004, we saw so much interest that we organized a bunch of conferences to go down, seminars to go down to the United States. So we stopped in Seattle, and we stopped in San Francisco and Los Angeles, and we spoke to about 350 people that all paid to sort of come and explore what the options were in terms of moving. And the media just took off on it. It was pretty interesting because Fox was playing it as, you know, the people that are interested, well, they have same-sex marriage there, so the people are coming, they're probably homosexuals. Oh, they're very light on dope smoking. You're able to smoke dope, so they're coming there to smoke dope. And you know what? They're Democrats anyway, and so we don't want them. They might as well go. Right?
All the liberals, they're happy to get rid of them. Yeah. So Gordon, if you are an American, might have some people listening from just across the border, and you're thinking of coming to Canada, is it hard?
I think for the majority of people, it's not as easy as they wished it would be.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of Americans would like to just pack up the vehicle, cross the border, and hope that they can just put down roots right away. And it doesn't work like that. You need to fit into a pigeonhole. You need to be in a selection category. So for some people, it will work. For other people, no, it won't. For some people, if they can have a job here, an employer who wants to employ them and get a work permit, that's great. For some of them, NAFTA is going to be a good arrangement in order to get that work permit. Not for everybody, but for some of them.
I fly a lot to California for different events that I go to. and the flights to Los Angeles and to San Francisco are jammed with, I'm guessing, Canadians and Americans working on either side of the border for the high-tech industry in San Francisco, and then in California, obviously, for the film business. So you must see that as well. People in those sorts of sectors come across, but they don't come as citizens, they come as with permits. Is that how it works?
Well, that's correct. But having the ability to work in a country, and particularly having the ability to work in Canada, is a very good foundation as a start towards getting permanent resident status and ultimately citizenship. In fact, it's almost a fundamental step.
And do you work for these people?
Yeah, we work for them and we work for their employers. So we work for, you know, Canadian animation companies, for example, wanting to hire graphic designers coming up from the U.S. We'll help them, you know, make sure that their employees have the right paperwork to come here and start work. So we see a lot of that. And that's the big difference, I would say, from 2004, when there was that spike in interest. You were able, you know, in 2004, if you spoke English, you know, if you were fluent in English, most Americans, right? You had a university education and you had skilled work experience, there was a good chance you'd qualify to immigrate, and you were able to apply in 2004 and then eventually move here. That's not the case anymore. The immigration system has changed dramatically. It's far harder to come, and without a job offer, very few people qualify to come without a specific job offer.
And even with a job offer, it can sometimes be very difficult. The government's trying to smooth out some of those rough edges, as we'll talk about. But there are rough edges on it right now that didn't exist before.
So you went down and did this cavalcade down the west coast of Americans in 2004 that wanted to leave after the George W. Bush second election, and then you were on television. So how did you handle it as a Canadian to the Bill O'Reilly saying, well, they're all just a bunch of liberal and Democrats, good riddance? So what was your take? What did they ask you?
Well, I mean, what were the Americans asking, or what was Riley asking?
What was Riley asking you? Because he's the one we all know.
He kind of painted it as, well, anybody can come to Canada, right?
Yeah.
You know, and you know, so
who would want to go there anyway?
And who'd want to go there, and you could have them anyway. Good riddance. Which you know, the counter argument to that was clearly, well, these are people with money. I mean, the one client that NBC showed had just bought a massive lodge, right? So they showed this beautiful picture of a bald eagle. NBC Nightly News showed this picture of a bald eagle coming in, landing, and going, America? No, this is Canada, and this is where this American has just invested, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars to buy a lodge, and she's left, you know, partially because of the change in politics in the States. Right?
Have you had any follow-through? Are these clients still in Canada?
Oh, they're still in Canada. Oh, yeah, they've become Canadian citizens. You know, I just helped another client who, through that meeting in San Francisco last year, we just immigrated her mother after several years. So that they you know, moved to Canada, become Canadian citizens, and now brought family members.
So I guess the flip side of that is, so that's the Republican president, George W. Bush, and then fast forward to Obama gets in 2008. Were there any inquiries?
Yeah. Yes. yeah. There's people, no matter who gets elected in the States, I guess there's people who are unhappy, and maybe unhappy enough that they start looking for another place to roost.
But these are small numbers, I'm guessing, the number of Americans who...
I mean, typically in a year, we get about 6,000. So 6,000 Americans a year. And in a good bumper year in the last 10 years, you'd say you get 10,000. So it's not like we're going to see... I mean, Canada immigrates, you got to take that against the sort of number of immigrants we get. We get 285,000 people every year.
That's a small percentage.
It's a very, very small percentage, but still puts them in the top 5 in terms of immigrating countries, right? Like
and they assimilate better because they speak the language, and
we have a history of Americans. I mean, if you take a look at the West was settled when we offered free land sort of at the turn of the century, there was a lot of American farmers from the Midwest that gave up their property, sold it, and were able to move to Canada and get free land. I mean, you know, Americans have been coming to Canada for a long time.
So what was the beef with Obama? I mean, everybody said, we want change. Yeah. They got change, so...
They were worried about the taxes. I mean, what I saw were sort of people were sort of, high net worth individuals that were looking at the way taxes were going to pay for the wars, that they had to be paid for, the Obamacare, and thought, well, where are they going to get the money for that? And it's going to be on taxes, and we're going to get taxed. So they wanted an option where they thought they could move and avoid those taxes.
Well, what's going to happen if Bernie Sanders becomes president? I mean, you're going to have Canadian-style taxes on everything. So you might get those high net wealth people leaving again. Yeah. That's interesting. All right, now, a guy who seems in the last week through Super Tuesday, and I guess this past Saturday, not this Saturday, but the Saturday before was called Super Saturday, where they had a lot of primaries and caucuses, and Ted Cruz seems to be, you know, coming up and getting close now to Donald Trump in the primaries and what have you. He's got getting more and more delegates every single week. So he was born in Calgary, but had an American mother, and has renounced his Canadian citizenship. So what's the process for that? How do you stop being a citizen when you were born on that land?
Yeah. So there's. Do you want to take that, or yeah.
No, there's a formal process. It's covered under the Citizenship Act.
Yeah.
But it's a formal process. You don't just stand up and turn 3 times. Say,
salute the American flag and it's done, right?
Yeah.
No, you have to make a formal application, and as Conrad Black found out, it's a fairly permanent solution too.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, you don't undertake it lightly.
Yeah. So Ted did. I mean, so Ted did that. Ted Cruz did that specifically.
But only
to
in the
avoid,
last 2 years. Like, it's fairly recent.
Yeah, he did it. The process takes a little bit less than a year. You've got to, you have to have citizenship somewhere else. So he had U.S. citizenship. I mean, and the people that we've seen look at renouncing Canadianship before are usually people that have tax issues. They want to sever all their Canadian ties and make sure there's no sort of tax. And we see very few Canadian renunciations. This is the only one I've ever seen where somebody came forward and for political reasons wanted to cut it out of the debate. I mean, that's clearly the only reason he did it, to make sure. So, to get citizenship, there are different ways where you obtain citizenship. One of the ways is being born on Canadian soil. So anybody that comes to Canada and is in Canada, has a baby, that baby born on Canadian soil is automatically a Canadian citizen unless they are here as part of a diplomatic mission or sort of with a transfer of, sometimes there are visiting military personnel that have children. They do not get citizenship. But so for example, we've seen I've had clients that come over here specifically to have babies in Canada. So they basically arrange it. It's the baby tourism, and they book flights.
Well, then the U.S. has come up with the term anchor babies, right?
The anchor babies, exactly. So they, you see a lot of Koreans that will arrange because they have mandatory military service in South Korea because the North Koreans, they're like, well, I'd like my kids to avoid the military service. If I come over here, pay. So they arrange it at the hospital. They book it at Children and Women's Hospital here in Vancouver. They pay the $10,000, $15,000. It's booked ahead of time. They come over here. The officer, the border officer, the Canadian CBSA officer of the border knows that's why they're coming, and they let them in.
And you're not here to have a moral stand on this. You're just stating the facts.
I'm just telling you the facts. That's what it is. I mean, it's a big debate as to whether that should be allowed. Like, what connection does that person have to Canada, really? Zero, right? Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of debate about that, but nobody's followed through on it, really.
I guess Ted Cruz doesn't want to come for free health care when he retires at 60.
No,
I've run into so many Americans, or people are Canadians, and I say, where you live? Oh, I've been living in California for 30 years. Well, why are you back here? Well, my doctor said I need this, 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 and this. Go back to Canada. It's free, right?
Yeah.
I'm not down, personally, not down with that, but those are the rules.
It's horrible. You take a look at the stats. I mean, on healthcare cards, there are a couple articles in the paper written about this. The MSP cards, we have 4.5 million people living in BC. We have 9 million health card issues.
Oh, really?
So 2 to 1. Somebody's using that service and not paying tax on it, right?
We've had all of these waves of Hong Kong immigration, mainland Chinese immigration, as you said, Koreans and Lebanese. And you remember when there was bombing in Lebanon, the Canadian government was rattled for not going and getting all of these people out in a timely fashion. And then as soon as the bombing stopped, they all went back. Yeah. So we call them passports of convenience, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you have as a firm, any kind of stance on this, or do you just play by the rules as they are?
That's the politician's role. We don't set policy.
No.
We just have to work.
You have a mighty gavel here right now. It's called the media. So.
Right. But I mean, look, if the government was wise, they would contact us. We'd sit down with them and tell them what we think the good policies are.
Yeah.
But politicians make policies based on what they think is going to get them votes.
Yeah.
And sometimes those policies are good, and sometimes they're not. And some things need to be discussed, but they haven't been discussed.
Well, we're going to get into some policies. We're going to talk about Citizenship Act changes, but these are all things that have come with the new Trudeau government and things that are in the news in the last little while. Family class. We're going to talk about the LMIA process, express entry, and more when we return on The Law Show on CL 650.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CL 650.